Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelley Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, the CEO of Boardroom Resources and your host for today's show. We're going to be talking about an interesting topic today. It's sort of a board update when proxy votes are important to board members. And joining me is somebody that knows just a little bit about this topic. Welcome Ron Schneider, who's the Director of Corporate Governance Services at Donnelley Financial Solutions. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you, TK. My pleasure.
Well, not only do you have the experience in this end of the business, which is actually developing the proxies, but previously you were a proxy solicitor. So what we're going to be talking about on getting the votes that are important to board members is something that you've lived a good part of your career.
Well, yes, and getting the vote has always been important to me, and increasingly it is important to board members.
So let's first talk about the examples of where board members feel the pressure to get the vote. What are examples of some things where it's sort of hyped up a little bit?
Okay, well let me just start kind of at a basic level with this heightened level of activism that we've been in for a number of years. It's generally the board that is, telling management whether to fight or settle, in a contested election or a contested transaction. And for board members to do that effectively, they do have to have good information on the overall ownership voter base and be provided with good intelligence on that so they can, mitigate foreseeable risks about, this campaign is not going to succeed, or you might have to make some changes or concessions. So they're heavily involved there. I would say that issues like mergers traditionally largely economically driven. Boards didn't have a lot of direct, certainly in approving the transaction they did behind the scenes, but the voting was traditionally on the economics of the transaction. However, there could be situations where the strategic rationale for the merger may be questioned, and they may, as shareholders engage with them increasingly, want to hear their thinking there. Certainly a certain type of going private, like a management buyout, the board is in an interesting situation because they're representing all the shareholders who essentially would be sellers and want to sell at the highest price, and yet the buyer, perhaps the CEO or the founder, wants to purchase the company at the lowest price. So, that's a tenuous situation. It has to be handled carefully. I would say that Say on Pay has really brought the compensation committee front and center in front of the shareholders because, if there's a perceived pay for performance disconnect, the attention quickly goes not to the CEO whose pay is being questioned, but to the comp committee that structured it or approved it. So increasingly, boards, nominating and governance committees may be involved on shareholder proposals about board structure, okay? And certainly board election contests where either the board members are targeted themselves for replacement or the non-governance committee is trying to make the case for why the incumbent directors are the right answer as well. So definitely boards are getting involved or being pulled into more voting situations on a broader array of issues.
Yeah, I'll add one to the list, and that was State Street saying that they'll start looking at voting against non-gov committees that aren't sensitive to diversity on the board. So we'll add that.
That'll be interesting to watch going forward, yes.
This sort of all came to light recently in a pretty high-profile proxy battle with Trian Partners and DuPont. And what made this particularly interesting is DuPont had a larger than normal share of what they call retail shareholders, okay? Typically a company might have 85% institutional shareholders. I think that's the average, across the industry. But DuPont did a good job of sort of engaging their retail holders, but isn't that a perfect example of why that shareholder engagement should be a big issue just in case they need to have that kind of reach out to retail?
Sure. Certainly it's most cost effective to focus top down on the institutional investors, which pretty much everyone does, but many outcomes are very close. I worked on many proxy fights where the outcome was 52 to 48, 51 to 49. And the retail component, if you're able to cultivate it easily, can be the swing vote. Institutional investors have a high culture of voting. They're highly likely to vote. The question is how are they going to vote? Whereas retail investors, if you can get them to vote, traditionally are highly likely to support management. So what was kind of interesting about DuPont was, for a large cap company, the significant retail component. Many mid and small cap companies may have similar percentage ownership profiles, but the reports that we heard is they did a very effective job in cultivating that retail support. And it's hard to say at the end of a vote, what was the swing vote. I mean, maybe it was the great job they did with their amending their board slate and attracting some key institutional votes at the end. But they did get the majority of that. I think it was about 35% retail ownership, and so they took full advantage of that. And many other companies won't have 35% retail, but in tough situations, contested situations, companies will tend to try to cultivate the retail vote because they know that could make the difference between 51 or 49.
Yeah, I remember. Well, I think I'm correct that this is the 10th anniversary since they launched the e-voting, and I remember all the discussion around that was supposed to be the new thing for retail, that everybody was going to vote without having the information in front of them. They could get it on the computer and stuff like that. A couple years after that was introduced, I remember the conference board did a study on that. And here's what they said, because I'm curious to hear your views on it. A low response rate from shareholders creates a risk of falling short for a required quorum, with a consequence possible inability to approve the resolutions on the agenda. So they were saying that e-voting has reduced the retail vote, and now you had a risk of quorum. Then they went on to say a low retail turnout may amplify the impact on the activist vote, since retail shareholders are traditionally inclined to vote in favor of the company's proposals. In other words, a decrease in street shareholder response may help dissidents prevail. So when there wasn't this sort of acceptance of that, now there was the risk that e-voting would actually hurt. So as we look at this, look back over the last 10 years, what are the facts? What happened with e-voting, sure, and what should boards be aware of?
So I was in my proxy solicitor role back it was about a 2-year ramp up before it became effective in 2008. So people knew it was coming. And we all, spoke at so many industry groups and said, look, it's going to, the change in procedures is going to confuse your holders, at least in the first year. Understand that, okay? They're used to receiving the ballot or proxy card along with the annual report and proxy in the mail. If they wanted to vote, it was right there for them to do. And what the facts have borne out, and it's called e-proxy quite often, but in truth, it's really a mailing in the most cases, notice and access. So it's a notice of internet availability that is mailed to most retail holders. And it then gives them the options, if they can't vote just based on that notice, it gives them options to access the materials electronically or to request a paper copy. So it is a two-step process if they want to vote. What's been really striking, and the numbers are completely consistent over every year since the inception, is fewer than 5% of retail holders, that receive the notice and don't get the traditional full set of materials, actually vote. That's on average across all companies, okay? So 19 out of 20 retail holders receiving that first step in a two-step process, that one-page notice of internet availability, are ultimately going to vote. And while companies can use notice and access in board election contests, they can't in business transactions. So, for whatever reason, it's not available in a merger. I guess it was assumed to be too strategic and too important. But I'm not aware of any companies that have used notice and access in a proxy fight, because they recognize, as you pointed out in DuPont, that you've got to beat the bushes for the support wherever you can get it. So it's largely been not noticed, and not accessed. Now, that's not to say it's a total failure. Has it, saved some trees? Certainly. Has it helped some companies appear more environmentally sensitive? That's another reason. Has it saved some companies money in printing and postage? Larger companies in particular, yes. But from that retail voting participation, it's just amazing how it really not just confused people initially, it continues to have very low voting participation.
We have about a minute left, but could you review what board members should be asking in the way of steps that they want to ensure are taken to make sure that they are getting the most highest vote possible?
Sure. Number one is they have to know their company's ownership or voter profile. You can have two competitors, two banks across the street from each other, same size, a lot of the same investment characteristics. They could have completely different ownership profiles. Okay, so quite often people make the mistake, well, this worked at this company, they're a peer of ours, they may have a completely different ownership profile. So, while the corporate secretary certainly knows this and investor relations, I think it's important for board members to track the ongoing shift in the composition of their ownership, number one. Number two, if they are, and you've had programs on engagement and you've had some of the investors talking about, engagement with directors, and you've showcased directors who have done some of that engagement, building that, foundation of understanding and relationship building before you need it is important as well. I like to say that eventually every company is going to engage. The question is, will it be proactive before you need it, or is it going to be, with a gun at your head in an activist situation? Based on that, are you telling your best board and governance and compensation story in your proxy? Because no matter how proactive and broad-based your direct engagement program is, you're not going to reach everybody. You don't know who all the street name holders are. So the proxy may be their only window into the boardroom. So I would say, certainly understand the issues, understand investor sentiment, understand your company's profile, and look at what your peer companies are doing. Quite often the motivators at some of our clients for enhancing their proxy and evolving it have come from new directors who joined the board and said, well, we do a nicer job of telling our story at the company I came from. I think we should be doing that here. So I think boards are attuned to that. And again, there's direct engagement, which is wonderful when you can do it, but quite often the proxy is your standby engagement tool.
Yeah. Well, Ron, thanks for taking the time to come and help us sort out this important topic. And that will conclude this episode of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelley Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.